Thank you, Jesus, for another opportunity to stand in front of your people and declare your glory. I always tell a story, so here goes my story. There was a very wealthy man that had everything that the world could afford to him. He had everything that the world could afford. Had a nice home, cars, servants. But the most thing that he enjoyed in life was to laugh. He liked to hear funny things. So one day he and a bunch of his very rich friends attended this comedy event somewhere in the town. And they just happened to be this new up-and-coming comedian that he was kind of a no-name. Nobody had ever known him, never heard of him. But this guy made the crowd laugh. I mean, they laughed harder than they had ever laughed before. This rich man laughed to the point where he would almost wet himself. It was that funny. He told some of the jokes that he had never heard before. It was just a funny joke. Over and over again, he just told all these jokes for an hour or so. And after the show was over, the rich man did everything he could to work through the crowd to kind of get to that comedian. He said, he finally got to him, he shook his hand, and he said, "Look, I'm a very wealthy man, and I'll offer you a job as my very personal comedian. There's no thing in this world I like better than to laugh. Would you accept it?" So they talked and agreed on the terms. I mean, he offered him a nice home to stay in and a very hefty salary if he would be his very own personal comedian. And he thought it over, and he said, "Man, how can I turn this down? All I got to do is tell jokes. It's easy." So he accepted this job as this rich man's personal comedian. It's kind of like the kings years ago had jesters. They were their personal, folks that made them laugh. So he took the job, and for years, he would always put on a personal show for this rich man and his friends. Years and years pass by. The rich man lays on his deathbed. And he knew that his last breath would come in just a few moments. But the very last thing he wanted to do was have a final laugh. So he called for his comedian. He said, "Bring him up here to my room and let him put on a show for me, my very last show." So he did. And he did the best he could. He done everything he could to make that man laugh. And the man, he laughed. But after his show was over, he walked to one thing I forgot. When that guy hired the comedian, he handed him a stick and said, "Now, here's this stick." It was kind of like a contract. "Here's a stick. Now, if you find somebody that's funnier and crazier than yourself, you give them this stick." I forgot to tell you that during his hiring, but at his deathbed, he walks over to the dying rich man and says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going on a journey." And he asked the rich man, he says, "How are you going to get there?" He says, "I'm not sure." So then that comedian had been carrying that stick for many, many years, reaches in his jacket pocket and hands that dying man the very same stick that he gave him on his hiring day. And he says, "Why are you handing me this stick?" He's because I found the most foolish, craziest man, more crazier than me, because you are going on a journey and you don't know how to get there. For years I have been being foolish and making fun of the ways of life by telling jokes, but you have been making fun of eternity by not accepting Jesus Christ, because you don't know where you're going. So the moral of that story is basically to tell you this: we got to know where we're going. Life is like a journey. It is. And basically, I guess the name of this, if you want to give this sermon a title, would be Finding Joy in Your Journey. Finding joy in life's journey. And we got several scriptures, but for a few minutes, let me do a little talking. We talk about the rich man that he didn't know where he was going. But, life's journey actually begins for us, our human life's journey begins for us at birth. And it ends when God calls us home. That's for our human life, but life continues even on after that. We know that there's life after death, either in heaven or in hell. So here on earth, that life will take us down smooth trails. It'll take us down rocky roads, and sometimes it even takes us down hazardous highways. Because life is like a journey. There was a movie many, many years ago, was it National Lampoon's Vacation? This guy went on a vacation with his family, and everything that could go wrong went wrong. Really. He gets to his destination, and the amusement park was closed. They didn't plan things right. And it's just like life. Life, sometimes we don't plan things to happen. We don't plan to get sick. We don't plan for, hazards in our lives. We don't plan for things to happen. We don't plan for our car to break down. We don't plan for our refrigerator to go bad. We don't plan for life properly sometimes, but it's still a journey that we all have to take. Each and everything that we go through in life began at your birth and ends at your death. So life is like a journey. Some of the roads are smooth, some of them are bad. But nonetheless, it's still a journey. Joy comes easy to us joy comes naturally to us when it's the easiest times in life. It does. Joy comes easy when everything's going good. But when everything's going bad, it takes a little bit of effort to find your joy, don't it? It takes a little bit of effort. So we're all going through the journey. We're all going through life's journey. Some of you may take roads that others don't. Some of you started many years ago before others did. Some of you, your journey will last longer than others will. But nonetheless, if you live to be 50, I'm 51, so my journey has lasted me 51 years, and it has taken me down some rough roads, but it's taken me down some great roads too. The scenery's been wonderful. You see what I'm saying? So life is like a journey. And today we can turn on the news, and everything we see practically is bad. Everything we see on the news is bad. We see about riots and fights and racial tension, and we see all this going on about ISIS and everything that we hear on the news. You rarely hear a good news story because it's really, to the world, it's not news. Good news is the gospel. Right? The Bible calls it the good news. But the news you hear on that soapbox is always bad, the majority of the time. I'd say 85 to 90% of the time it's always bad. So when we hear in news over and over and over again, we hear about the bad and negative things that's going on, constantly being bombarded with what's wrong. And by our own human nature, we tend to develop the habit of complaining. And it's bad how it happens, but we're conditioned as a human that way. But the Bible tells us in Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 through 16, that we're really not to complain. Look what it says. And I like the way the Message Bible reads this. It says, do everything readily and cheerfully. Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then on the day of Christ's returns, I will be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. So regardless of what's going on your journey, regardless if you on a rocky road and you need a four-wheel drive, because sometimes in life we need our four-wheel drive spiritually. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we get on a road that it's real bumpy. I don't know if I can make this journey, Jesus. With them old rocky roads. How many's ever been mud riding and four-wheeling? Sometimes it's hard to get through them spots, ain't it? Many years ago in Talladega, I had we called it a doodle bug, but it was an old Volkswagen. An old Volkswagen that we had the fenders cut off. We made it that way where we could go mud riding with it. So back in the backwoods of Talladega, what they call the old gold mine area. So you can't go there anymore. They kind of blocked it off and fenced it off. You can't go, but that's where people always went mud riding. So I took my dune buggy, my little Volkswagen, out there on the gold mine to the gold mines, and I got in a rut that I couldn't get out of. When I opened the car doors, mud comes rushing in up to almost my knees. I'm sitting in the seat and I've got mud all in my Volkswagen. I thought, man, how am I going to get out of this? Good thing that thing never quit, though. It kept running. And of course, I got some of my buddies. They were on other four-wheelers and stuff, and we got it out of there. But it took a while. Man, that thing, it was mud inside that thing. The easiest thing to get it clean was just open the doors and wrench it out with a hose pipe. And sometimes our lives are that way. Sometimes we get in such a rut that the best thing we can use is God's hose pipe. The Bible tells us that we are clean by the washing of the water of the Word. Right? So I'm calling that God's hose pipe, God's fire extinguisher. The washing of the water by the Word. Sometimes we get in God's Word and it will kindly clean us up from the ruts that we've been throughout the day. Does that make sense? One day a man was walking through this real big hotel, walking to go get him something to eat at the restaurant that was in this really nice, swanky hotel. And he passes by a table with some men and a dog playing a game of cards. And he noticed it looked like the dog was winning because he had everything over here on his side. He thought, man, this is crazy. So he scratched his head and he made the statement. He said, man, that must be one smart dog. He said, and one of the players said, no, not really. He ain't as smart as you think, because every time he gets a good hand, his tail wags. When you are joyful, people see it. When something's good going on in your life, people know it. So I'm talking about today about restoring. The book of Nehemiah says the joy of our salvation. Do you remember the day you first got saved, what it was like? How much of a burden was lifted from you? There's an old song, the burden of my soul's rolled away. It made me happy, glad and free. I'll sing and shout it 'cause he's everything to me. Remember the song? Oh, Henson's used to sing that. So the joy of our salvation, we can restore the joy of our salvation. And when people see that you have joy, they know it. When you're in a crowd and you're smiling, people see it. The joy of your salvation, from the moment when you gave your heart to Christ, God wants us to have that joy always. But life's journey sometimes don't let us have that joy, does it? Like I said, sometimes we get in the mud. There are times when life drains us to the point to where we're running empty. So sadly, we let life sometimes rob us of our joy. The journey will rob us of our joy. Now, I had some pictures of some things about joy. A bottle of Joy dishwashing soap. We also have a Joy stick. And we also have, I don't like them, but almond Joy. I don't like coconut, but anyway, you think about this. When you run out of dish soap, so what you got left? An empty bottle. When you eat all the almond Joy, what do you got left? Probably just one almond or an empty wrapper, right? And then if you lose your joystick, you got a video game that ain't going to work. So that's like losing your joy, but I'm not talking about that kind of joy today. I'm talking about losing what's inside. Losing what God has given you. When the day you gave your heart to Jesus, I know the day I gave my heart to Jesus, I can tell you it's December the 8th, 1991. I remember it like it was, because I call it my birthday. Matter of fact, it's on my calendar, my spiritual birthday. And it was. Pastor was preaching, and I thought the whole time he was preaching to me. I knew that I could have ran in that door at the beginning of the service and went to the altar because I was ready. But I waited for his sermon, waited for his message, and then I waited for the call. You know what I mean? The altar call. Y'all remember the days when they had the altar calls all the time? And we had an altar call. I came and I gave my heart to Jesus that day. And I felt so good. Matter of fact, that's the first day I ever stood behind the pulpit and said something. Really. Other than like singing for the choir. But I stood there, I said, brother, hand me the mic. I always like to talk anyway. But I said, hand me the mic. And with tears in my eyes, I said, I'm here to stay. And I didn't mean in that church, but I meant with Jesus Christ. Because I had joy unspeakable and full of glory. I had the joy, not this kind of joy, but I had the spiritual joy that God gave me because I knew I was forgiven. I was set free from where I had been in the past. Yeah, I gave my heart to Jesus when I was little, but you know, I strayed. It took a tragedy that happened in my life to finally return back to that joy. And sometimes, you know, that was another part of my journey. It was a rough life. My dad had died. And that's what brought me back. Seriously. That's what brought me back, because it was a rut I couldn't get out of without Jesus. You see what I'm saying? It was a rut and I couldn't get out of without Jesus. So what do we have left when we run out of joy? It's just superficial things that won't do us any good. But we run out of spiritual joy. We need Jesus. Maybe you're here today and you lost your joy somehow. You've lost the joy of your salvation in some way. Something may be troubling you or bothering you, or something that's worrying you, that's impacting your very well-being. Who you are as a person. You can't seem to think and concentrate on what is going on around you because you're worrying that much. It may be a sickness. It may be a friend that's going through something. It may be a financial burden or whatever's going in your life. The devil has stolen your joy. It's happened to us all. You're not alone. We've all had our joy taken away from us. But the book of John tells us that Jesus restored the joy of a people that were at a wedding in Cana. The book of John tells us that Jesus restored the joy of the people